All right, everybody, welcome to tonight's summer marathon kickoff webinar with me, Coach Seth. And I want to thank everybody for taking time out of your busy schedules for this informational call. And we're hoping to get through this in about 45 minutes and certainly leave some time for questions and answers at the end. So tonight's call and webinar is really meant to be an overview of what you can expect this summer as you get ready for the Chicago Marathon or your whatever fall marathon, because we do have others doing races outside of the Chicago Marathon that are on this call as well, or who will be listening on the playback. So I'm going to get started. And if you have any questions or comments throughout the way, feel free to use the chat feature. Everybody's line will be muted tonight, guys, and that chat feature is what you're going to want to use, the chat box, if you do have any questions. So before diving into the information, a little bit about me. Again, my name is Seth, and I'm an owner and running coach of Kopf Running. We're based in the Chicago area in the northwest suburbs, certified running coaches, personally a 10-time Chicago Marathon finisher, and I'm really proud to say that I'm a 9-time Chicago Marathon charity athlete, which is really cool. Most of you who are on the call tonight are running for a charity that Kopf Running has the privilege of partnering with, so that's incredible. My 9th year coaching charity athletes, and super proud to say that we've helped over 2,000 athletes cross the finish line at Chicago since 2011. So did you know that less than 1% of the world's population has successfully completed a marathon? Can you wrap your mind around that? It may seem like everybody's ran a marathon. Maybe your coworker or a friend or a family, you probably know a person or several people in your life that have ran a marathon. So it can seem like everybody's done it. But if you look at the world's population, it's less than 1%. So what you're about to do in a few months in October is really an incredible feat. And again, like I mentioned, most of you are running for charity. So running for a cause that's greater than yourself is really going to make this extra special. So a quick systems check before we start training. So our training is if you're following one of the training programs I sent out last week, is going to be 20 weeks in length, starting next Monday, the 27th. These programs, guys, assume that you've been consistently running for the past 6 to 12 months. Some questions to ask yourself: have you been properly fitted for running shoes? Do you have running specific socks ready to go? Running apparel, if that's something that you're interested in or would like to invest in. Certainly you don't have to have running specific socks or running apparel. Running shoes are really the only truly really, I would say, mandatory piece of gear that you need to have. So if you haven't been to a running specialty store and been fitted for a pair of running shoes, I would highly encourage you to do that. Obviously have a plan for when you're going to fit in your runs and your workouts. Are you going to run in the morning before work? Run before the kids wake up? When are you going to get your long runs in on the weekend, Saturday, Sunday? Who's going to watch the kids? Or if you don't have kids, are you going to be meeting a group? When does the group run? So having a plan and support system in place is going to be key to making sure that you have a successful training season. And then, of course, I think most of us probably know our why, but that's going to be important. That's something that I'll refer back to not only in the webinar tonight, but in communications that you'll receive throughout the summer is know your why. If you're running for a charity, my guess is you probably have an answer to why you're running. It's for a cause that's greater than yourself. You probably have a personal connection to the organization, or maybe you're running in honor of a family member or a friend. But certainly knowing your why is going to help you get through some of the more challenging times in training and on race day. So this is really kind of a general top 10 marathon tips for success. Hasn't really changed from last year, but in my years of coaching and running, I've seen that these 10 items have really proven to be critical and consistent across the board for those who who have had successful training and race day experiences. If they've been able to kind of accomplish these things, they've had successful experiences. And number one, consistency is always going to be king. It's my number one tip in running. There's no faking your way through training for a marathon. Myself included. Maybe there's some of you out there who ran half marathons and got by on subpar training, where maybe you hit some runs, maybe you didn't, and you didn't necessarily feel that bad about missing them. But with the marathon, when you're talking about a distance as great as 26.2 miles, there's no faking your way through training, and consistency and being able to wake up every day and getting your workouts in is going to be paramount. If you've taken the time to look through the programs, or even if you have it, it's important for you to know that warming up and cooling down before and after our runs are, in my opinion, a must do instead of a hey, nice to do. The reality is that 80% of runners get injured annually, over 80%. So that's a high number, right? So we want to do everything we can within our power to minimize that number. So taking the time 5 to 7 minutes before you run, going through a dynamic warm up, and then taking the time to cool down, which a cool down can be something as simple as walking for 5 to 10 minutes to get your heart rate down and to start really jump starting that recovery process for your next day. Warm up routines have been included in the programs, but honestly, it doesn't need to be something that's overly creative. It could be something as simple as jumping jacks and push-ups and squats and lunges, side lunges, just to kind of get you moving in all planes of direction and to get that blood flowing to the operating system, so you're not running cold. Last point on that, we've all probably had runs where maybe you had a 5-mile run and it took a good 2 to 3 miles before you kind of felt like you were in that flow state. We want to really feel that way from the first step or the first couple steps, definitely within the first mile of our run. So that warm up is going to really help us accomplish that a little bit quicker. Develop a daily mobility practice. What I mean about this is really, examples would be foam rolling, soft tissue work, can even be stretching. I prefer to do these types of things at night when I'm starting to wind down. Maybe I'm watching a little bit of TV, and other than just mindlessly watching the television, hopping on the floor, using a foam roller, doing some stretching, a lacrosse ball to find some of those trouble spots. But getting in the practice of doing that on a daily basis will really help reduce the likelihood of injury. And a really cool tip or trick of the trade to hack your sleep. If you have trouble sleeping, guys, actually doing the foam rolling and the mobility work at night will help jumpstart the parasympathetic system, which really helps you to get to sleep faster. Will help you unwind a little bit faster, so a little bit quicker. So that's something that you can do in the PM. Strength training is a priority. I look at this and I look at you not only as runners but as athletes. And as runners, we have a tendency to only want to run and not necessarily do some of the ancillary activities like warming up and cooling down. But the strength training routines that I attach to the programs, or there's all kinds of resources out there, right? I mean, a really great resource that I like is the Nike Training Club app. It's a free app. There's all kinds of strength routines on there. There's actually even runner-specific strength training routines that take maybe 15 minutes at most and don't require a gym membership. Just something to help support the running to be done after your runs is nice. But I would look at the strength training as a must-do. So I would even go as far as, if you're time crunched, cutting the run down by 10 minutes or so to be able to supplement that strength training in at the end of the run. So it's a must do, not a nice to do. Again, all in line and the point to keep us as consistent as possible and decrease the likelihood of injury. And strength training, mindful strength training, runner specific strength training is going to do that. Most of our runs are going to be ran easy, or we're going to be abiding by what I call the 3 C's of pacing. Your run overall should be comfortable, conversational if we're running with a group or a buddy, and under control. There's really the two different systems that come into play with running are the aerobic and anaerobic systems. The marathon is a 98% aerobic endeavor. So we want to really stoke the fire of that aerobic system, and running under control and comfortable and conversational is going to really allow us to do that. You know, a very common email that I get throughout training is, "Hey, Coach Seth, I feel like I'm running too slow. I'm not going to get faster." I would just point out that even the fastest marathoners in the world who are running, 4.5 minute miles or sub 4.5 minute miles are still running slow. They're doing a lot of their runs at the 8 to 8.5 minute mile pace. So for us mere mortals, think about that. So if you're looking to maintain a race day pace of, let's say, 8 minutes per mile, we can do these conversational and comfortable runs. If you don't have specific race pace workout, then there's not a problem with doing a 10.5 minute pace, because honestly, the misconception is that not being able to maintain a pace or a certain pace throughout a race is a speed issue, when in reality it's an endurance issue. If that makes sense. And so we want to also be running long. Of course, the most important workout of every week is going to be your weekend long run, and that is going to most closely mimic your race day conditions. And you'll be using the operating systems on race day that you're going to be using in your long runs on the weekend. For those of you who have specific race pace workouts designed in your programs, there's certainly going to be a time to run fast. Because if we have a race day pace in mind, well, that needs to be realistic, and we need to be able to mimic that in training and in tune-up races. So there's certainly going to be a time and place to run fast. Obviously, being accountable goes in line with number one, and being consistent. There's really no shortcuts or hacks to training for a marathon. So have an accountability system in place to where you're going to wake up in the morning, if that's what you're going to do to get up and get your workout in, or if it's after work or at night. But being accountable to yourself and to a group and to a cause is extremely important. Be realistic. You can only start from where you're at now. Maybe you did a marathon 5 years ago and you ran a 4-hour marathon. But life got in the way over the last 5 years. Circumstances are different, and it may not be realistic for you to repeat that 4-hour performance. So I'm sure a lot of you have in mind what you want to run on race day, and that's cool and that's great. But let's just make sure it's realistic. And if you have questions on that, that would be a great opportunity to email me, and we can talk through those expectations and goals, and make sure that we're starting from a point of reality. And then something that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I think is extremely critical, is the other 23 hours of the day, or just meaning that if you're training for an hour of the day, what are you doing the other 23 hours? And we're talking about, if you're sitting all day at work, how you're hydrating and what your nutrition looks like throughout the day, sleep, your sleep hygiene. Obviously as training starts up and you're putting in the miles, and the miles pick up over the summer, rest and recovery is going to be key to getting from one workout to the next. So if you're the type of person who burns the candle at both ends, and you get 4 or 5 hours of sleep, and you expect to stack marathon training on top of an already busy schedule, I think, again, going back to number 9, that's a time to say, hey, am I being realistic with my schedule, and what is going to set me up for success? So talking about the 4 phases of your training plan, and I think actually before I dive into this slide, I'm going to just hit the pause button here and see if there are any questions here. Let's see. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to roll through the rest of the presentation, and I'll go back through each of the comments and questions that are on there, and we'll make sure we get those addressed. So the 4 phases of your training plan. So the 20 weeks are divided into these 4 phases, and starting off is what I call the foundation phase or the base building. This is really where you're stacking miles, the volume's starting to pick up, you're really developing good habits, you're developing a great aerobic base for you to be, and really setting you up to handle the really higher miles as you get into late July, certainly into August, and then into early September. June and July are really the time that you're building that base. You're also, I think, building mental toughness and resilience, because you're figuring out for those of you who have never trained for a marathon before, you're kind of figuring out what you like, what you don't like, how your body responds to the training and how you bounce back. You're developing those good training habits that we talked about as far as warming up and cooling down, getting your strength workout in. You're figuring out your rest. You're figuring out your schedule with this new element of training included. And after the foundation phase, after the first 8 or 9 weeks is over, we're going to dive into the sharpening phase. And really, this is your biggest volume of training. Some of you who have specific race pace workouts are going to really start implementing faster running in the forms of fartleks, which are really just forms of speed play, alternating various paces, progression runs, multi-pace runs, race pace runs. And then once that phase starts to come to an end, then that's really when you're looking at like early September, mid-September, that's when we're starting that race specific or that taper phase. And this is always a phase, and I think this is worth mentioning, that people start to freak out, right? Like they've ran their longest run of the year, they've ran their 20 miler, in some cases longer than that, and then we're asking you to then start decreasing the volume. And that really, the reason for that is that we're really working off of that accumulated fitness that you will have, really developed starting from May 27th up into that point, mid to late September, where you've been stacking weeks on top of weeks and months on top of months. And so there's not a lot that you can do really in those last 2 to 3 weeks to potentially improve your race day performance. But there really is a lot that you can do to jeopardize race day in terms of overuse, injuries, burnout, fatigue. And so we want to eliminate that. So the goal is to get you to race day with your legs feeling fresh, and obviously for you feeling excited for what lies ahead. And then lastly, the celebration phase, which is post-race. It starts immediately after you cross the finish line at Chicago or whatever your respective race is. You're taking the time to recover and taking inventory of what worked during the race, what didn't work, what worked in training, what you would repeat if you were to do another marathon, and what you wouldn't. And of course, it's most importantly time to revel in your accomplishment. So the various training benefits that you will receive, and this has been, I think, communicated in an email, but it's worth bringing up. So the training programs, which got sent out on May 13th, if you haven't received that email, please contact me via email, and I will make sure you get those because you'll want to take a look at those prior to Monday. Starting next Monday, you will receive weekly training and nutrition tips, and those are going to be sent to your email inboxes. So as long as you've been receiving emails from me, then then we're good. If you haven't received emails from me, then we need to check and make sure that we have the correct email address on file. But that is the training and nutrition tips. The feedback that I receive every year is that those are probably the most beneficial aspect of the benefit package, if you will, because those are chock full of information, not only from us, but from our partners, dietitians, strength coaches, physical therapists, chiropractors. So you'll want to take the time during the week to dive into those. You'll have access to me, really, that's just via email, phone, video support, and that'll be ongoing through race day. Access to educational webinars like the one you're on tonight. Access to partner discounts, which right now the discount that I have is with Noon Hydration. That discount code will be in your first tip next week. And as a Kopf running athlete, or a Kopf running charity athlete partner, you'll be eligible to receive 20% off your orders with noon hydration. So that's a cool little perk. And as additional partner discounts come down the pipe, I'll pass those on to you guys. And then an invitation to connect with us on Final Surge and Strava platforms. Final Surge, I'll just note, you can set up a free account. And once you do, you can let me know and I'll send you an invite. And then that's just a great opportunity to log your workouts. And then I'll automatically receive a notification that you have. And we can also communicate to that platform. And then with Strava, I have set up a Kopf running group that you can join. And I envision that I will throw out some challenges throughout the summer, and I'll probably do that through Strava. So the training programs, if you haven't taken the time to look through them, I encourage you again to do that before next Monday. But I sent out 6 training programs. Hopefully, most of them will encompass most fitness levels. If you've looked at them and you've decided that, like, hey, I want to follow plan number 1, but like I really need to modify it even further, then certainly email me and we can work on doing that before Monday. But the training programs I sent out, there's a walk only. So you plan to walk throughout training and you plan on walk or speed walking the entire marathon distance. There's a run walk, so where you have a specific time-based interval where you're running and a time-based interval where you're walking. That is a really great strategy for first timers. The run walk plan and the continuous run number 1 plan are really the exact same plans. Just one is a run walk and one is a continuous run. I will say this, in my experience, for those who are tackling the marathon for the very first time, you are almost undoubtedly, even with the best intentions and the best training, you're almost undoubtedly forced to walk at various points of the race. And that just comes from inexperience. It comes from improper pacing, and a whole slew of different things. So if you are deciding between plan number 1 or a run walk, I would encourage you to give serious consideration to the run walk program, because I'm a big fan of that. And then there's a continuous run number 1, which is essentially a plan for first timers. Plan number 2 is a plan for beginners, a little bit more intensive than plan number 1, where we start throwing in some speed and strength concepts. And then run number 3, which is an intermediate, and then 4 is an advanced program, where I find that the least amount of people follow plan number 4, and really the kind of that sweet spot is in the plan number 3 and plan number 2, and then the run walk. So, but if there's any questions like, hey, I don't know what plan I want to follow, and you want to provide me with some background information, then shoot me an email and we can have a conversation and we can figure out exactly which plan is right for you. And then our upcoming webinar dates, there will be a few more added, but these are the ones that are established right now. So next Tuesday, a week from tonight, I will be co-hosting a webinar with Karen Shanahan of Athletico Physical Therapy at 6 o'clock. And she is a doctor of physical therapy. Athletico Physical Therapy is a proud supporter and sponsor of the Bank of America Chicago Marathon, and they are now, I think they're throughout the country. They're a national company, but she'll have some really great tips on keeping yourself healthy, and just some thoughts on some of the most common running related injuries and how we can avoid those. The second webinar, and undoubtedly the most heavily attended, is a training and nutrition webinar with my dietitian, Tom Jordan. That is on Tuesday, June 18th at 6 p.m. And he will dive into the do's and don'ts of nutrition and while training for a marathon. And he does a great job of answering questions. There's usually a lot of questions, and he is very gracious for his time. Not only is he a registered dietitian, but Tom is an incredible athlete himself and has worked with individuals of all ability levels. So you want to check that out. And we have another webinar on Tuesday, July 23rd. It's going to be a webinar focused on strength training. So talking about the benefits. By that point, you'll have essentially 2 months into your belt of training and doing some strength work. But Denise Smith, owner and physical therapist of Smith PT and Running Academy, will share her thoughts and also share some additional plans that you can start implementing right away in your training. And then one I didn't include in there, but about a week before the race, or I should say a week before the Chicago Marathon, we will have a race day ready webinar where we cover all the basics of race weekend and race day, and make sure that we get all your questions answered as you head into race day. And then, for those of you who've trained with me before, I'm a pretty cheesy guy when it comes to inspiration, and so I share a few quotes on this slide. But the one that I'll read and point out is the first quote, and it's something that we touched on with the top 10 tips. But I love it, and I think it applies that we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We tend to fall to the level of our training. So there will be a moment on race day when and if you're running the Chicago Marathon, where you're surrounded by 40,000 plus like-minded folks, and music is blaring. There's nervous energy all around. It's just an incredible experience, surreal, really. And in that moment, you'll know, like, hey, I earned this start line. I did the work, and I'm gonna have a great experience, or I'm gonna know at least I gave my best in training. So I would encourage you to make sure you have everything in place, hold yourself accountable, and be realistic so that you can have that feeling on race day that you know that you did the work and you're going to have a great experience. And then when all else fails, just keep moving forward. That's our company motto. We stole it from Walt Disney, but I think it applies, right? So not only in life, but in training, where there's going to be some training runs where it literally hurts to take another step forward, and it might be all that you can do to get from one stop sign to the next, or to get from 1 mile to the next, and certainly on race day. So just keep moving forward, keep moving in the right direction, and you will eventually get to that finish line, I promise you. So at this moment, so I'm going to leave this slide up here. We're going to open up the Q&A portion of the webinar. But on this last slide, it's just ways to connect with Kopf Running. We've got an email or a website. I encourage you to follow us on especially Facebook and Instagram, where we're most active. Of course, there's the Strava, the link to our Strava group. I encourage you. And then also we send out a monthly newsletter, or nowadays it's a bi-monthly newsletter, but with best intentions, we try to make it a monthly newsletter. I encourage you to check us out on all those platforms. As we will be posting training related tips and just fun facts throughout the summer on social media. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to the Q&A portion here, and make sure that we get those questions answered. Yeah, okay, so diving into the questions here, Julio asked, if you're training on a treadmill, let's see here, what would be a good time training and speed on one you would recommend? So yeah, that can be tricky, right? When you're kind of switching back and forth between treadmill running and running outdoors. They're certainly not the same thing. And this brings up another point, Julio, and I appreciate you asking the question. If you primarily run on treadmills, I don't have anything against treadmills. Sometimes they're a necessary evil, especially depending on where you live. But last time I checked, and I just want to confirm with everybody, the Chicago Marathon or your race will be outdoors. So the bulk of our training, we want to do that outdoors. You're incorporating different muscles when you're running outside versus running on a treadmill. When you're running on a treadmill, you really get the belt that's kind of pulling you along. So the way that you're engaging your hips and your hip flexors, your glutes, or your core, completely different. So in that case, Julio, that where you're having to run, do your training runs on a treadmill, I would kind of switch the thinking. I wouldn't necessarily look at it as a time or a speed thing. I would focus on how you feel and focus on perceived effort. So if it feels comfortable, and that's the type of run that you should be doing, whether that is a 5 on the treadmill or a 7.5 speed on the treadmill, it's going to probably change from one day to the next, right? Depending on how you're feeling. A lot of different factors go into it, and like how you're recovering. Have you consumed caffeine that day? So there's a lot of different factors. So with that said, I would just really kind of base that run, whether it's on a treadmill or outside, on how you feel. Like it feels comfortable. I can talk to myself without getting winded. Then if you can do that, check that off the list, and you're probably in that sweet spot. Hopefully that helps. Okay. So Nancy asks, I work every other Saturday. How should I adjust the weeks that I have to run long on Sunday and Saturday? Or should I take that offline in an email? That's a really great question, Nancy. I think let's do that because I want to find out more about your schedule and exactly which plan you're planning on to follow. So let's connect via email, and we can kind of hammer that out and make sure that you're good to go starting next week. Yep, you're welcome. So we'll leave it open for more questions. So Audrey, that's a great question. Audrey asks, if my regular mile pace is around 9 minutes, is there a suggestion for a goal race pace, or is it really specific to each athlete? It is definitely specific to each athlete. My question back to you would be that 9 minute per mile, has that been established? When you say has that been established in a recent race result, or is that just what you typically run in training? And if it is in training, is that consistent across the board, whether you're running 3 miles or 10 miles? It is really specific. I think that if it is based off of a recent race result, then I would use that as your goal race pace. I also think that we've got 20 weeks to train, and as long as we're able to be consistent, stay healthy, and do the work, your running fitness will improve. And what that means is that your speed will improve. So that goal race pace or that average of 9 minutes per mile might start dropping to 8:50 per mile, 8:45, 8.5, where you might have shaved 30 seconds per mile off during a training block. And so that might be your goal race pace. What I would encourage you to do, and this is a really great point, so I appreciate you asking the question, is I would encourage everybody to incorporate, anywhere between 2 to 4 tune-up races prior to marathon race day. So, and I would even say, okay, yeah, do a half marathon. Anywhere between late August to mid September, and obviously that's going to give you a pretty good idea of what your fitness is, and that's going to probably give you a good indication of what you can expect to run or in that ballpark on race day for Chicago or your respective marathon. But get out there in late June, July, August, run some 5Ks, run some 10Ks, throw in a half marathon, and establish where you're at. I would probably give yourself a solid 4 weeks of training, but I am not against you even during that foundational phase of throwing in a 5K or a 10K. And that's easy to do, guys. If let's say you have scheduled 12 miles that day, just for example, but you're going to run a 10K, well then, you go through your warm up, you'll run the race, you've got your 6.2 miles in, and then afterwards you run, the additional 5, or maybe you run a mile or two before the race, run the race, and then, whatever's left, you finish post race. But then you can kind of get an idea of truly where your fitness lies. But I think it's a good question, and it is specific to each athlete, but you also have to be mindful of, there's various factors too. Nutrition, caffeine consumption, sleep, quality of sleep, recovery. So I just gave you a lot of information. I'm sorry if I was rambling, but I hope that helped to a certain degree. And if you have, certainly you want to dive deeper into that, let's connect offline. Oh, you're welcome, Audrey. So Dave asks, you included 3 different warm-ups in your email. Do you recommend doing all 3? The lunge matrix sequence, the leg swings, and the Ryan Flaherty warm up. I would here's what I would do, Dave. Um, if you could, I would say if you're going to do the Ryan Flaherty, the RJF warm up, then just do that by itself and then do your run. You can certainly combine the lunge sequence and the leg swings together, but if you're time crunched, just do one of those and it's better than nothing. One thing that I like to do as well is, you know, do the lunge matrix, the lunge sequence before my run, get my run done, and if I have a little bit of extra time, actually do the leg swings afterwards. Because I just find that after runs on my hips get really tight after a run. So even before I do like a 5 to 10 minute walk just to cool down, I'll do the leg swings. So you can certainly do the lunge and the leg swings together, and then do the Ryan Flaherty warm up by itself. But we don't have to overly complicate these things either. Those are just suggestions. It can be something as simple as, hey, I'm going to do 20 jumping jacks, 15 squats, 10 burpees, 5 push-ups, maybe some calf raises. That takes me, a minute to 2 minutes, and I'm done. If you're time crunched. So I just want you doing something and getting in the habit of doing something. But those are just some great starting points too. Yep, you're welcome, Dave. Keep the questions going because we are still recording the webinar, and even if you're hesitant to ask, chances are somebody out there has the same question. And if they see that their question gets addressed, you're not going to only be helping yourself, but you are probably going to be helping somebody else that you've never met. So that's a cool thing too. And of course, Audrey's got another question. So I often cramp and have extreme muscle fatigue during long runs. Is there anything you can do to recommend to help with this? Um, I think that Audrey, that's tough, right? That's a challenging thing, and that sounds like to me that that's probably a hydration issue. Um, I would really start and be mindful of, and I think this is a great practice for everybody, right? So if you've never spent the time with a dietitian or a nutritionist, the first thing that they typically recommend is the lowest hanging fruit, and it's something so simple as start tracking what your hydration and nutrition looks like on a daily basis through something like a free app like MyFitnessPal. So be mindful of what your hydration looks like. I will say this, that people can drink uh, 3 liters of water a day and not and really not have it properly hydrate them because they're actually overhydrating. So considering adding a little bit of sea salt or regular iodized salt to your water, your hydration will help. Um, I would also say this. Obviously, not a nutritionist, not a dietitian. Outside of tracking your what your hydration and nutrition looks like, I would really encourage you to um, make sure you attend the nutrition webinar next month. But I think that that really sounds like a nutrition and hydration related issue. Could be something even greater than that, where you might want to get that addressed early on in training. So, and Audrey, if you want to connect offline, I can connect you to at least a couple of resources to kind of start leading you towards maybe some more definitive answers. Julio brings up stretching is something I tend to forget. You mentioned something about the Nike app. Do you know if they have tips on easy stretches that would be easier to remember? Thanks in advance. Yeah, so the Nike Training Club app is a great app. Those tend to be more workout focused, where you're doing, hit routines. There are running specific, and then there's, just flat out like strength training ones with weight and then without body weight. Um, I would say, you know, set an alarm at night for about 45 minutes before you have to go to sleep, to where you're going to dedicate 20 to 30 minutes of stretching. If it's something that you know you could really benefit from, I think that Julio, you'll find some really great insight from next week's injury prevention webinar, because I know Karen is going to be sharing some very specific stretches that everybody needs to do, every runner needs to do to make sure that you're staying healthy. But I would focus on the main systems, the quads, the hip flexors, the glutes, the calves, and you know, really spending a good anywhere between 30 seconds to up to 2 minutes per stretch to really get the benefits of that static stretching. And I think it's also worth mentioning that we want to do that static stretching post run. And not do that before the run. We want to do those dynamic movements where we're getting the joints moving, we're getting blood flowing, where versus the static stretching where we're just kind of elongating those muscles before a run. So, but yeah, I would check out next week. And then also too, Julio, if you want to email me, I can even maybe send you a few different stretches that I'm not necessarily thinking of um, right now. So Dave says, I have always warmed up prior to a run with static stretches. I've tried your warm up for one run and it went well. Should I only do the static? Yes, Dave. So I think I just alluded to that, but I would keep the static stretching guys to post run. If you think about it, and I was talking to a chiropractor yesterday about this, and we got into a discussion, and it makes sense to me. So that if you think about it, as runners, we're getting injured up to 80%, or up to 80% of runners are getting injured annually, right? So we want to start stacking the odds back in our favor. And when we stretch, we're really elongating that muscle, and we're already getting injured within our normal range of motion. So if we're increasing our range of motion, we're really in theory, or really in practice, increasing our likelihood of getting injured. So I think that doing the dynamic warm up is perfect. Because you don't necessarily want to be all elongated and stretched out. You want to have some spring to your muscles and to your joints and your ligaments. I think post run and certainly at night is the time to do those long static stretches, start getting into that connective tissue. And if for those of you who are foam roller enthusiasts or use tools like lacrosse balls or softballs, I would encourage you to do that at night, like I mentioned, and use like the mobility tool beforehand, so you can kind of hunt around and find where those spots are. And when you find a spot, use the tool to kind of get into that, but then stretch afterwards to kind of, once you've unlocked that trouble area, to where then you can start to elongate that area and get proper blood flow. So if that makes sense, hopefully that helps. So I would keep the static stretching to your post run. Nancy, good question. I have a coaching account with Final Surge. So Final Surge, you can set up a free account, and then just let me know when you do, and then I'll send you an invite. And on Strava, Kopf Running is a group on Strava that you can connect on. So I'm not on Training Peaks, so Final Surge and Strava. You're welcome. Mike asked, do energy gels such as goo really work? Yes. And Mike, I'm excited for you, because our nutrition webinar with Tom Jordan, he dives into energy gels, how they work, why they work. And really, I would say this: training is great practice, right, for race day. So we're going to figure out do gels, because really it's just carbohydrates that we're getting into our system in a very fast acting way, because your body is burning through those as you run, and your body can only store a certain amount of those carbohydrates or glycogen before, which are interchangeable, carbohydrates and glycogen, before it runs out. Whether it's gels or chews or beans, they all pretty much are meant to do the same thing, but I've had clients where they just couldn't stomach gels. They didn't like the consistency. So I would encourage you to do a couple things. Try them out, listen to the webinar, um, ask questions on the webinar, and get those questions answered. But I would also say this: when it comes to nutrition, um, listen to everyone but follow no one. So you've got to take everything with a grain of salt. You want to practice with the various nutrition products and figure out truly what works for you. Are you going to just use gels or chews with water, or are you going to just use something like water and a noon hydration, or a water and a Gatorade combination? These are all things that you should figure out. But you will certainly want to supplement with something during training, because once you get past like that hour mark of running, that's really when you need to start supplementing and getting some nutrition back in your body. I have kind of evolved over the years, where I was a devout gel user, and now anymore I kind of have changed, and it's a little weird, but started using just like real foods, like nut butters, bananas, apples, those types of things. I just found that when I'm done running or done with the race, they just tend to settle a little bit better in my stomach. So again, you want to try this stuff out and figure out what works for you. Also, another point is, a lot of us out there have food allergies. My family suffers greatly from food allergies, with gluten intolerances and dairy issues and soy issues. If that speaks to any of you on the call or who are going to be listening, so you want to make sure that you check out what those products entail. I will say, full disclosure, not only am I an ambassador for Noon Hydration, but I am an ambassador for Honey Stinger products, just because they're more natural and I don't feel crummy after I take them. So Honey Stinger would be something that I would highly recommend. You can get those in kind of the gel format or chews, or they even have like little wafers that are delicious. So you want to play with all that. Okay. Yep, you're welcome. All right, so let's see. So Julio, be more beneficial, I think, for me as well, since I had gotten injured last year during the run, and even when you train for everything, the one thing I didn't factor in was the rain. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. For those of you who are running Chicago, in the 10 Chicago marathons that I've done, I've had weather where the start of the race was 80 degrees and you knew you were going to be in for a long day, and I've had it where it was 28 degrees and it was freezing, and it took a long time to get warmed up. And then last year it rained at the start, and you're just getting rained on as you're just waiting. So I think it's important to train through all the elements, and even purposely, even in the dead of summer when it's really really hot and really really humid. And yeah, of course you have to get the runs in when you can, but it's not going to hurt you to run in the middle of the day every once in a while on a Saturday or on a Sunday when it's 85 degrees and crazy humidity, because you might experience that in Chicago on race day. You can't expect a super cool day just because it's October. Chicago just doesn't. It's just not that way. So yeah, important to train through the elements. Get off the treadmill as much as you can and get outdoors, and start mimicking what you're gonna experience on race day. So guys, I think at this point, it's 6:50, so it's 10 till. So I think that's a good spot to put a period and put a bow on everything. If I didn't get your questions answered on tonight's call, shoot me an email, Coach Kopf at kopfrunning.com, or send me a message on Facebook. Connect with me on Strava and Final Surge, and we'll make sure that we get you ready before the start of training. But I just want to say this is something that is really cool. Most of you are charity athletes, so you're getting this offering, which is really free to free to you and being covered by the charity. So that's a really cool thing. It's an honor to work with these various charities. It's an honor to work with you. So I would just say, of the services, the programs, the weekly tips, the email, phone support, the webinars, use those resources as much or as little as you like. And don't be afraid to ask questions. I'm here for you, and I'm in awe of your guys' commitment to not only your health and your fitness, but also to a cause that's greater than yourself. And the last thing that I'll say, and I think it gets lost in all this, is that you probably don't even know it yet, but you may sense this or find this out throughout your training, and certainly by the time you cross the finish line in October, that you're inspiring others around you. Maybe it's your kids, maybe it's a significant other, maybe it's a parent, or maybe it's a coworker or whomever. But don't discount what you're doing. It's something that less than 1% of the world population has ever done. So that's a really cool thing. So kudos to all of you. And I look forward to working with all you guys this summer. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy week. And we will be back here in 1 week for the injury prevention with Karen and Athletical Physical Therapy. You're very welcome, guys. And we'll talk soon. Have a great night.